He was just a poor farm boy mocked by his teacher for smelling like dirt. But when a helicopter landed at the school, everyone discovered who his grandfather really was. The morning mist still clung to Ethan Brooks's worn boots as he walked through the pristine hallways of Westfield Preparatory Academy in Austin, Texas. At 17, he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the whispers that followed him wherever he went. His calloused hands, roughened by dawn chores, told a different story than the manicured fingers of his classmates. Ethan was an anomaly at Westfield Prep, where tuition cost more than most families' annual income. While his peers arrived in luxury cars driven by chauffeurs, he rode the public bus, his backpack patched with duct tape and his shirts always carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. The other students came from families of prominence, tech moguls, oil executives, politicians, but Ethan's address was a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. What his classmates didn't know was the sacrifice behind his presence at this elite institution. Every morning at 4 a.m. he fed livestock and tended crops before catching the earliest bus to school. Every afternoon he returned to more farm work until darkness fell. His acceptance letter to Westfield had been a miracle, a full academic scholarship that his grandfather had somehow secured, though the old man had always been vague about the details. Mrs. Catherine Sterling commanded her advanced placement history classroom with the authority of someone born to privilege. At 42, she was known for her sharp intellect, designer suits, and complete intolerance for what she considered mediocrity. Her family had old money, her husband was a federal judge, and she viewed education as a privilege reserved for those who could appreciate its value. From the moment Ethan had entered her classroom 3 months ago, she had made her disapproval clear. His rural background, his quiet nature, and his obvious financial struggles were, in her mind, evidence that he didn't belong among Westfield's elite student body. The American Civil War, Ms. Sterling announced, her voice cutting through the morning chatter, was not simply about slavery, as many simplistic interpretations suggest. It was about complex economic and political factors that shaped our nation's destiny. Ethan listened intently, taking careful notes in his worn notebook while his classmates typed on their expensive laptops. He had always found history fascinating, particularly stories of people who overcame adversity. But as Ms. Sterling's lecture continued, exhaustion from his early morning farm duties began to weigh on his eyelids. "Mr. Brooks," Ms. Sterling's voice cracked like a whip through the classroom. Ethan's head snapped up, his pencil still poised over his notebook. Several classmates turned to stare, some with smirks already forming on their faces. "Since you seem to find agricultural duties more pressing than American history, perhaps you can enlighten us about the economic factors that led to secession?" Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. He had been listening, but the complex question required a moment to formulate a proper response. The silence stretched as 30 pairs of eyes watched him struggle. The southern states were concerned about," he began, his voice uncertain. "Exactly what I expected," Miss Sterling interrupted, her tone dripping with disdain. "Incomplete knowledge from incomplete preparation. When you're more concerned with mucking stalls than studying, this is the result." Snickers rippled through the classroom. Sophia Martinez, daughter of a tech billionaire, exchanged amused glances with Ryan Thompson, whose father owned half the oil fields in Texas. Ethan felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but something deeper stirred within him, a growing anger at the injustice of it all. "Perhaps," Ms. Sterling continued, warming to her theme, "you should reconsider whether this institution is the right fit for someone of your background. Not everyone is meant for academic excellence. Some people are better suited for manual labor." The words hit Ethan like physical blows. He had worked harder than anyone in this room, sacrificing sleep, social life, and comfort to earn his place here. His grades were among the highest in the class despite his exhaustion, but none of that seemed to matter to Miss Sterling. "With all due respect, ma'am," Ethan said, his voice quiet but steady, "my background doesn't determine my intelligence or my right to be here." Miss Sterling's eyebrows arched in surprise. Few students had ever challenged her authority so directly. "Is that so?" she replied, her voice dangerously soft. "Then perhaps you can explain why your attendance at our parent-teacher conferences has been so sparse. Where exactly are these parents who are so invested in your education?" Ethan's jaw tightened. The truth was painful. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 12, leaving him in the care of his grandfather. The old man worked from dawn to dusk managing their farm and had never felt comfortable in the polished environment of Westfield Prep. "My grandfather has been busy with harvest season," Ethan replied, maintaining his composure despite the emotional blow. "Ah yes, harvest season," Miss Sterling said with mock understanding. "How convenient. Well, Mr. Brooks, when your grandfather finds time between collecting eggs and feeding pigs, perhaps he can visit us to discuss your academic future. Until then, I suggest you focus less on defending your pride and more on catching up with your classmates." The classroom fell silent. Even the students who had been enjoying Ethan's humiliation seemed uncomfortable with Miss Sterling's cruelty. Ethan stood slowly, gathering his worn textbooks with deliberate care. "You're right about one thing, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. "My grandfather is a farmer, and I'm proud of that. He's taught me about hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect, lessons that seem to be missing from your curriculum." Without waiting for a response, Ethan walked out of the classroom, leaving behind a stunned silence and a teacher whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange. Ethan completed his morning chores with mechanical precision, his mind still replaying the previous day's humiliation. He had considered not returning to school at all, but his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Brooks men don't run from fights, boy. We face them head on." As Ethan approached Westfield Prep on the public bus, he noticed an unusual commotion on the school grounds. Students and teachers were streaming out of the building, their faces turned skyward with expressions of amazement and confusion. The rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors grew louder as Ethan stepped off the bus. Above the school, a sleek black helicopter circled once before descending toward the football field with military precision. The aircraft was clearly expensive, corporate grade with gleaming paint and tinted windows that spoke of serious money. Ethan felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread as he joined the crowd gathering at the field's edge. Helicopters didn't land at Westfield Prep every day, despite the wealth of many students' families. This was something different, something that had even the jaded faculty members whispering among themselves. The helicopter touched down with barely a whisper, its rotors gradually slowing as the engine wound down. The passenger door opened, and a figure emerged that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. William Brooks stepped onto the grass with the bearing of a man accustomed to command. At 73, he was still tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. He wore a charcoal gray suit that had clearly been tailored by master craftsmen, and his presence commanded immediate attention from everyone present. But it wasn't just his appearance that caused the crowd to fall silent. It was the recognition dawning on many faces. William Brooks wasn't just any wealthy Texan. He was the William Brooks, founder and CEO of Brooks Agricultural Enterprises, one of the largest agricultural conglomerates in North America. His face had graced the covers of Fortune and Forbes magazines. His company supplied organic produce to every major grocery chain in the United States and had pioneered sustainable farming techniques now used worldwide. Ethan watched in amazement as his grandfather, the same man who helped him with homework at their kitchen table, who taught him to milk cows and drive a tractor, walked across the field like he owned the world. And in many ways Ethan realized he did. Principal Anderson, a man who prided himself on maintaining composure under pressure, looked visibly shaken as he hurried forward to greet the unexpected visitor. "Mr. Brooks," he stammered, extending a hand, "this is unexpected. How can we help you today?" William Brooks's eyes, the same pale blue as Ethan's, surveyed the crowd until they found his grandson standing at the edge of the gathering. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I'm here about my grandson," he said, his voice carrying easily across the field despite its conversational tone. "I understand there's been some confusion about his place at this institution." The words sent a ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. Students who had tormented Ethan for months stared in disbelief. Teachers who had dismissed him as a scholarship charity case began to reassess everything they thought they knew. Miss Sterling, who had been watching from near the school building, felt her blood turn to ice. The events of the previous day suddenly took on a terrifying new dimension. William Brooks walked directly to Ethan, placing a firm hand on his grandson's shoulder. "I'm sorry I'm late, son," he said quietly. "I should have been here sooner." Ethan found his voice with difficulty. "Grandpa, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," William interrupted gently. "Sometimes people need reminding about what matters in this world." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and congressional hearings. "My grandson Ethan has been attending this school on what you call a scholarship," he began. "What you might not know is that the Brooks Foundation has contributed over $12 million to this institution over the past decade.
We built your new science wing, funded your computer lab, and endowed 3 teaching positions. Principal Anderson's face had gone completely white. Ms. Sterling looked like she might faint. More importantly, William continued, my grandson represents everything this school claims to value: academic excellence, moral character, and determination in the face of adversity. He maintains a 4.2 GPA while working on our farm every day before and after school. He's overcome more challenges than most of these students will ever face. The silence was deafening. Ethan felt a mixture of pride and embarrassment as hundreds of eyes focused on him. I understand there was an incident yesterday involving a teacher who felt my grandson's background made him unsuitable for academic pursuits, William said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I'd like to meet this teacher. Ms. Sterling seemed to force herself forward on unsteady legs. Her usual confidence had evaporated completely. Mr. Brooks, she began, her voice shaking, I believe there may have been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, William interrupted. My grandson told me exactly what happened. You humiliated him in front of his peers because he works on a farm. You suggested he was intellectually inferior because of his background. Miss Sterling's mouth opened and closed without sound. Let me tell you something about farming, Miss Sterling, William continued. It requires understanding of biology, chemistry, meteorology, economics, and engineering. Modern agriculture is one of the most technologically advanced industries in the world. My company employs more PhDs than most universities. He stepped closer to the trembling teacher. But more than that, farming teaches values that seem to be lacking in your classroom: respect for hard work, appreciation for what truly matters, and the understanding that a person's worth isn't measured by their bank account.
Ethan stepped forward, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. Grandpa, I don't want special treatment. I just want to be judged on my merits, not my address. William Brooks's face softened as he looked at his grandson. You've already proven your merits, son. But sometimes the world needs reminding about what real value looks like. He turned back to Miss Sterling, who was now openly crying. I believe an apology is in order. I'm so sorry, Ethan, she whispered. I was completely wrong. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I treated you unfairly. Ethan studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Thank you, Miss Sterling. I accept your apology. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause. Students who had never spoken to Ethan before were looking at him with new respect. Teachers who had overlooked him were reconsidering their assumptions. As the helicopter prepared for departure, William Brooks pulled his grandson aside. I want you to remember something, Ethan. Respect isn't about money or power. It's about character. You've shown more character in these few months than most people show in a lifetime. Will things be different now? Ethan asked. His grandfather smiled. Things are always what you make them, son. But now these people know that when they look down on someone for their background, they might be looking down on their future boss. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life at Westfield Prep transformed in ways both expected and surprising. The revelation of his grandfather's identity had initially created a buzz of attention that made him uncomfortable. Students who had previously ignored him suddenly wanted to be friends. Teachers who had overlooked him now praised his every contribution. But Ethan quickly demonstrated that his character hadn't changed with his circumstances. He remained humble, hard-working, and genuine. He didn't flaunt his newfound status or seek revenge on those who had mistreated him. Instead, he used his position to help other students who faced similar challenges. Miss Sterling had requested a transfer to another district, but Principal Anderson, after consulting with the Brooks Foundation, had suggested instead that she use this experience as a learning opportunity. She began volunteering at local community centers, teaching underprivileged children and gaining a new perspective on the challenges faced by students from different backgrounds. Ethan continued his daily routine of farm work and studies, but now he did so with his head held high. He had learned that true strength came not from hiding who you are, but from embracing it fully. On graduation day, Ethan stood as valedictorian of his class, his grandfather beaming proudly from the audience. In his speech, he spoke about the importance of judging people by their character rather than their circumstances, and about how the most valuable lessons often come from the most unexpected teachers. After the ceremony, as Ethan and his grandfather walked across the field where the helicopter had landed months earlier, William Brooks placed a weathered hand on his grandson's shoulder. You know, son, you taught me something important too, he said. What's that, Grandpa? That the best investment I ever made wasn't in land or equipment or buildings. It was in raising a young man who never forgot where he came from, no matter where life takes him. Ethan smiled, looking back at the school that had tried to break his spirit but had ultimately made him stronger. "Where I come from is exactly where I want to be," he said. And as they walked toward their truck, the same battered pickup that had brought Ethan to school every day, both grandfather and grandson knew that the real lesson hadn't been about money or power or status. It had been about the courage to stand up for what's right, the strength to remain true to yourself, and the wisdom to know that respect is something that can never be bought, it can only be earned. The farm boy they mocked became their valedictorian. Sometimes the people we underestimate are the ones who change the world. Character isn't about where you come from, it's about where you're going and how you treat people along the way.